This will be the start of the next Velocette video. It's getting a bit confusing if I've got multiple projects on the go, just to make sure I keep the little bits I film all consistent with the project. So yesterday was the day I stripped it all down. I haven't been doing much on it today. I've actually been working on the Riley and gardening and other bits and pieces. I did just have a quick look at something and started cleaning up the body. So what I'm going to do is take the body down to the sandblaster guy just down the road, and I'll get him to blast it to get it back to bare metal so I can start from a nice clean surface. But I have started roughing some of this out. So this was all bent up. You can probably see it in some of the other photos or the other films. And this was really mangled, and I've just realized why it was really mangled. Because they drilled these holes to fit cables through, which they didn't deburr, by the way, and I've already sliced myself on them a couple of times. I think to be able to drill those holes, they twisted all of this so that they could get a drill bit in at an angle to make the holes. So I've straightened all that out. The holes are a bit of a pain, but getting in there to weld those up will be a bit tricky. So I'll probably just patch those with some sort of resin or fiberglass filler or something, because that's not structural and it's not really seen. So as long as it's nice and smooth and clean, I'll de-rust everything. I don't want to try and take this apart just to get in there to weld it, and I didn't want to bend it and weld it and then have to hammer it all flat again. So like I say, at the moment I'm just kind of roughing it out. It was creased, so I'm trying to get the crease out of it. I've got all sorts of hammers and things, but sometimes just stuff like a piece of flat angle, and because there's no room in here to swing a hammer, I've got a spoon type tool here. But what I find works pretty well is an old tire iron. It's a car one, so it's quite long, which means you can get a bit of swing on it to get that all back into shape. So this has also got it's not a wired edge, it's just rolled over. It's hollow. There was a hole drilled there for some, I don't know why. I can weld that up. And this circular piece, so if you imagine the metal comes up and then the circle is on the top. So it means trying to hammer this flat is a little bit tricky because it gets in the way. So you just have to kind of take it carefully. But that already looks a ton better. You know, by the time this is all cleaned up and painted, you won't even notice that. I have been trying to figure out what holes in this are extra. So pretty sure these ones are, I think that one's original. I think that's where the battery cable must go through, down through there. Obviously all this has been battered. No, those are meant to be there. But I think once I get it cleaned up, it should be a lot more obvious. Cleaning up this edge down here is going to be interesting as well, because this is kind of a molding type piece, another folded circular piece. So to get in there to get that straight might be a little bit awkward, but I'm sure I can make it look better than it does. I mean, it's all kind of crooked, mangled, and you can see here how it's a bit something funny going on here that I need to fix. And this has all been bashed in as well, so this all needs smoothing out. Again, I can use something like my tire iron and get that up in behind there to help smooth that out. And the other thing I've done on this is I was actually making the fuel tank mounts for the Riley, and I used a piece of steel that was galvanized, and I wanted to get all the galvanizing off it, so I put it in some dilute hydrochloric acid, and that takes the zinc off. But because this tank was so clean on the inside, only a tiny amount of surface rust, I've used the leftover weak acid inside the tank, and I'm just sort of sloshing that around. That'll get the surface rust off it. And then I'll red coat the inside of the tank, but until I get to that, I'll probably just spray it all with WD-40 or something so it doesn't rust until I'm ready to give it a really good clean out before I before I coat it. And that's really all I've done on this. I did flush the tank out with the dilute acid, and then gave it a good clean out, and then realized I had something much better I can use, which is just some evaporust. So a nice full container of this pretty much fills the tank. So I'm going to leave that in there probably all week, because it won't do any harm to anything that isn't rust, and I can sort of shake it around, make sure the inside is really nicely cleaned, and that should be good to use. I wonder if that's the original paint, because if you look underneath it, it's a bit hard to lift up when it's full, you can see that metallic silver grey paint, which is what they were, the body colour. So I wonder if these were installed and then they just blasted paint over everything. Not sure then why one side is black and one side's oxide. But, yeah, that should come up quite nicely. And I've got this fairly clean. I ended up having to use a flap disc inside there just to take the burrs off it, because there were sharp edges everywhere. It's not perfect. There's a bit of oil canning in it, but as I say, that'll clean up okay. It's the inside of the toolbox, so you don't normally see it. Another evening working on the Velocette. I stripped down the two front ends I had. I also, at lunchtime today, took the body down to the sandblaster down the road. They're going to blast it carefully for me. The chap there, Tom, is a bike guy, so he was most interested in it, in the project, and wanted to know all about it, and I think he's quite happy to be involved. I hadn't stripped down the front ends at that stage, so I hadn't taken the front guards. I did wander down again after work. The sandblasting place is literally 300 metres down the road, less than that probably, but I was too late, they'd closed. I may pop them down there tomorrow, or else these probably aren't too hard for me to strip by hand, and I think what I'll do is I'll pick the best one, strip all the paint off that and use that. The whatever this bit's called, the bit where the steering bearings and things go, I think what I'm going to end up doing is mixing and matching the best set of parts. So this is the one that was on the bike. You can see the holes have all been bodged, whereas the one that was on the frame that seemed to have just been set up for display is in much better condition. The bearings of both of them seem good. It looks like they've been re-greased. I'll clean them out, make sure they're okay. They're tapered roller bearings, so between 4 of them I should have a good set. The rest of it's all fine. The nuts that hold the handlebars on had been kind of modified. They're in there somewhere. Somebody had welded big extensions to them and then put Allen head bolts in the end for some reason. And the other thing I noticed is there seem to be 2 sizes of brakes. These are tiny. They're like 1 inch wide, and the ones that came off the bike are about 1 1/4. And you can see the difference in the drums, maybe. So that one there is a lot smaller than this one, and this is probably the one I'm going to use. Wheel bearings I'm not sure about. From what I've been reading, getting those out needs a special tool, special sort of drift, I think, so I need to look into that. Drums are okay. Spokes are okay. There's surface rust on this, but I will, it's easy enough to clean all of that up. Which reminds me, I've still got my tank full of evaporust. Probably leave that for a few more days. And the front shocks and springs, they all look good. They're all sitting upside down at the moment, so the oil drains out of them, although to be honest, I think most of the oil drained onto the floor when I was dismantling them. They all seem fine. I've numbered them so I know which one came off which set. So I should be able to easily pick a best set from those, but as I say, they both seem to work. They all seem to have the same amount of dampening in them, so I'm pretty sure they'll be alright. You can see where this was modified. Someone screwed the ID plate onto there. I'm not sure where that's supposed to go, but yeah, that's more progress. I will get the tyre off there. If it's anything like the KT, the tyres were so old I ended up just cutting them off because I wasn't going to reuse them. I think they're hidden under the woodshed at the moment. At some point I'll take them to the tip, I guess. And we'll look at ordering new tyres, new wheels and tyres for them. Or new tyres and tubes rather. Same with the rear. So I think that'll be the next thing, is to start stripping down the frame, the engine and the gearbox. I'll get the rear wheel off, get the rear shocks off. Apparently this is correct, the way these rear ones work, just with that grease in there. They're really easy to take apart. They'd be even easier if it was all the right nuts and bolts, but even then nothing seemed to be done up particularly well, so it's all coming undone really well. The thing that worries me is if the inside of the engine has been dealt with the same as the outside of the bike. Hopefully not. Hopefully that was just left alone. And I think I mentioned the radiator is pretty good. I'll go through and carefully straighten out the fins and things. It doesn't look rusty. There's no leaks or anything in it. And that ding will be the carburetor that should have just finished in the ultrasonic. So I'm going to get that out, rinse it off in some boiling water, and then I'll probably just spray it all with something so it doesn't rust until I can get round to stripping that down and rebuilding that. This is the carb after the ultrasonic. The stuff I'm using is Shesto, I think it's called, oxidization remover. So it actually gets rid of all the rust on things, as well as cleaning up the aluminium parts. It's still going to need a bit of a scrub. When I strip it down, I'll clean all the pieces individually, but for now it is just all soaked in WD-40, so that'll stop it flash rusting or corroding just in the meantime. Out in my shed again, working on the Velocette carburetor. So I had cleaned this in the ultrasonic cleaner, but I hadn't dismantled it, so that was just to get all of the dirt off the outside before I took it apart. And tonight I stripped it all down. It's really easy to take apart, and cleaned everything up, put all the individual parts through the ultrasonic again. I cleaned out all the jets and I made sure all of those were clean. I've cleaned out all the passages inside it. This is known as a multi-jet carb. I believe it is right for the Sierra bike, and then later they went to the Amel monoblocks. So it's in bits at the moment because before I can fully reassemble it, I'm going to need to remake some of the gaskets. So this is the gasket that goes between the two main halves of the body. That goes in there. It's very thin paper. So what I will do is I will scan this on my flatbed scanner, and then use that to make a CAD drawing of it, like a 2D drawing, and then I will laser cut a new gasket. I also need a new gasket around the sort of fuel bowl here. I haven't exactly worked out how it works, but the fuel comes in here and through this filter into this little bowl. I believe there's meant to be some sort of gasket in there as well, or a rubber ring or something, but that was missing. So, and that's what the wire clip there holds. So this is just, it's not really a filter, it's like a sediment bowl, I guess. So that all cleaned up okay. And then from there, it goes into this part, which is the actual float. So this seems to be the needle on the float. That looks pretty clean, and I need to check in the manual which way up this goes. So I'm guessing if it's a float and that's up, the pointy end goes that way. So that must fit in there like that. And then of course when the fuel comes in, that floats, and that little needle blocks the jet here, the little orifice where the fuel comes in. So that'll go back in there. That's not holed, which is good. And then you've got all of these jets. So the reason it's called a multi-jet carb is there's actually 7 of them. So there's 4 in this base piece. 1, 2, 3, and then where's the other one go? 4 in there, and then there's 3 in the top. And these jets are all numbered. When I took them out, I wrote down the numbers so I knew where they came from. I will check in the manual that those are all correct. I'm pretty sure they are. This thing's got passages all over it, so you might just be able to see those are the ends of 2 of the jets from here. This is what the jets actually look like. They're little brass things. I've cleaned these all up, if it'll focus, and they've all got a number on them, so you can match up where they go. And I cleaned them up. This carb's obviously been apart before because you can see the damage on the end, but I made sure all of the jets were clear all the way through by basically putting a light behind them and looking through it. It's not going to focus on that, is it? There we go. But I made sure you can blow through them all. One of them did have a little bit of debris stuck in it, so I've cleaned all of that out. These just sort of screw into the body, of course. They screw down like that. So yeah, lots of jets all over the place. So it should all go back together fine. Everything looks fine. It's all clean now. I did replace the little fiber washer on here. I need to sort out what goes on there, and then I can make the other 2 gaskets. Basically, there's the top cover gasket for that. So I'm just going to make sure that these are all cleaned up. This is some of the stuff I used to clean this up. These are the little sort of plastic brushes on the Dremel. They work really well. The little brass brushes work well for cleaning up the outside. The ultrasonic cleaner leaves a kind of powdery oxide type material on everything. Don't know if it is actually oxide, but powdery material. That just helps clean it off. So after I take it out of the ultrasonic, I clean it off in very hot soapy water. I just boil the jug and just have a little tray, a little dish, and just clean everything off to make sure they're all clean, and put it back together. I didn't take this apart. I don't think you need to on these. There's no passages or anything under there. I think there is also supposed to be a some sort of seal in here. I think this is the end that goes on the induction pipe, and that's this here. Yeah, it's just kind of flat on the end, so I think there is an O-ring or a seal that goes between those. But that looks like it should work. I don't see why that won't work. Everything's, like I say, everything looks correct and everything is clean. Once I make the gaskets, I'll put that back together and hopefully it's good. I won't know for a long time, of course, not till I rebuild everything else. I just noticed on the fuel bowl there's 2 other little passages to make sure are clean. Those 2 little holes there go to tiny little vents. So I've made sure those are all cleaned out as well. I drew up my gaskets in Fusion 360 I didn't bother scanning it in the end. I just took a photograph with a rule next to it to give me a scale, and I actually got the body gasket slightly too small, but it doesn't really matter because in the laser cutting software you can scale it up. So I just figured out I was slightly too small. I had to laser cut it at 106%, and that gave me the right size. So you can see this is the original one and my new one. My laser cutter isn't exactly cutting circular holes at the moment, so it may need a little bit of adjusting, but it's close enough. And similarly, I cut the fuel bowl gasket that'll go on there. I'm going to use a very, very thin smear of Hylamar on it, on both of those. Actually, probably not the fuel one for now, in case I need to get back in there, but the body one, I'll use that to help seal between the two halves. My carburetor is all reassembled. The threads on one of the bolts was a little bit dodgy feeling, but by removing the sort of lock washer, I was able to get a little bit more thread engaged, and it did tighten up, but I used some Loctite on it just to make sure. And for the filter bowl, I found a thin O-ring that seems to be sealing in there okay. I'm not sure exactly what was used in there originally. I need to look in the parts book, but that seems to be working. And if you blow through the carburetor fuel inlet this way up, you can hear that it's blowing through all the different passages and things. If you tip it upside down, so the little needle blocks the fuel inlet, that does seem to seal. So these carbs are only gravity fed, so it doesn't need an awful lot to shut off the fuel. So I think that's good. It's come up quite nicely. I'm just going to spray it with a little bit of WD-40 so the steel bits don't rust. And then I think that's done and can be put away until it's needed. And the fuel tank, I've had the evaporust in it for quite a few days now. So tonight I emptied all of that out. It's definitely cleaned up all the rust on the inside. I gave it a good clean out with boiling water. Just clean water, boiled that, put that in there, and sloshed it round, got it all clean on the inside, got all the evaporust out, and then got the water out, let it dry for a little bit. And I'm using Red Coat fuel tank sealer. I've used this on a couple of things now, and it seems to work really well. It comes as a powder, and you effectively dissolve it in acetone. So it is fuel proof, it is ethanol proof, it's not acetone proof. So acetone will remove it, which is actually something I like. I know other people recommend things like POR 15 fuel tank sealer. I've never had much luck with that particular brand of paint. It'll stick to everything really well, like your hands and paintbrushes and clothes and the floor. But I have had it not stick to rusty metal. And they say it's because of the prep, you have to use all their prep stuff. But I have seen it sort of peel off in sheets more than once. So I tend not to use it anymore. And that was with doing all the correct prep. So inside a fuel tank, I don't know if their fuel tank sealer is the same stuff. It might be different, so maybe it's fine. But I don't like the idea of something that might not adhere to the inside of the tank and is going to peel off in large sheets, or worse, peel off in some places and not others, and there's no way to remove it. If it's inside a fuel tank, you can't get it out. What I like about this stuff is acetone will redissolve it. So if it completely goes wrong, you can put acetone in the tank and it's going to get rid of this stuff. It'll dissolve it out. The other thing is this goes a long way. So you tip it in, you slosh it around the inside of the tank to coat the insides, and then you can pour it back out and you can reuse it. So my Austin 7 fuel tank has been done in this. The KT250 fuel tank was done in this. I've got a petrol container that I use that I did in this, and that was kind of my test thing. I restored an old petrol can, and that's been fine. That's worked really well. So this is what I use. I'll give it a second coat. Won't be tomorrow now, it'll be the next day. I'm out tomorrow. But you can do that. You give it a second coat, and it will, let's see. Yeah, second coat after the first dries completely. And it takes a few days for it to dry because the acetone has to basically evaporate out of it. So that'll be fine. I will give it a second coat to make sure it's really nicely coated on the inside. The only problem with it is you have to be careful of inlets and things. You don't want these plugged up, but you can sort of unplug them after the fact. And then of course I will strip the outside of it, which is pretty easy. That paint will come off pretty easily, and reprime and repaint that. So that's another little job done. I'm kind of going about it in the wrong order really, but everything has to be done eventually, and it can be quite nice to work on little bits and pieces and clean them up and know that they're done and put them away ready for the day when you actually get to bolt them all back on the thing you're restoring. But I think that's all I'm going to do for today.